moving along to the opening scene, which is probably one of the most iconic opening scenes from the 90s. We have Casey who says,
"Hello?"
which launches us into the phone call sequence, which is a nod to two movies, When a Stranger Calls
Hello?
and Black Christmas,
Hello?
where the killer also calls their victims to toy with them. We'll throw two on the board here. Okay, moving on to this shot of Casey making popcorn. This is a reference to the classic horror film Halloween, where Annie is also preparing some stovetop popcorn.
Never mind. Guess you found a hot date.
And speaking of Halloween, if this tracking shot looks familiar, it's because it was modeled after the opening scene of, you guessed it, Halloween. And trust us when we say this isn't the last you've heard of Halloween in this reference tracker.
Halloween.
See?
Yeah.
Then they go on to talk about the film A Nightmare on Elm Street, when Casey says,
Well, the first one was, but the rest sucked.
this is actually a cheeky nod to director Wes Craven's body of work. He directed the first installment of Nightmare on Elm Street, but not the sequels. Fast forward to...
You hang up on me again, I'll gut you like a fish, understand?
That's a reference to the 1984 movie The Mutilator, where characters are, yep, gutted like fish. Here we have someone who phoned in their Halloween costume. I mean, here we have Ghostface, the movie's antagonist, whose mask was inspired by the aptly named painting The Scream by Edvard Munch, as well as artwork from the Betty Boop cartoons and the Pink Floyd album The Wall. And this scene where Casey desperately tries to outrun him, it's based on this scene from the 1974 horror classic Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where the character Sally runs from the villain Leatherface. Next up, Casey's cries for help are modeled after this scene in Halloween 2. And Ghostface dragging Casey across the lawn is hauntingly similar to this scene from Dementia 13. Then when Casey's dad says,
drive down to the Mackenzies.
Jamie Lee Curtis's character in Halloween had identical plans.
I want you to go down the street to the Mackenzie's house.
Moving along to here, where Casey meets her early demise. This isn't just an ode to 1977's Suspiria. When director Wes Craven and writer Kevin Williamson decided to kill such a big name at the beginning of the movie, they were using the Hitchcockian early death trope, like when Janet Leigh was killed in the first half of the classic film Psycho. Fast forwarding.
It's just me.
Okay, pause. Billy climbed through Sidney's bedroom window just like Johnny Depp's character in Nightmare on Elm Street. And you hear that song playing in the background? It's an acoustic cover of Don't Fear the Reaper, which also plays in Halloween. But it needs more cowbell. Okay, let's speed ahead a bit.
You okay?
Stop here. See the sheriff? That's actor Joseph Whipp, who also played a cop in Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street. Also, does this guy look familiar? That's Henry Winkler, who played the Fonz on Happy Days. And we'll come back to Arthur Fonzarelli in a minute. Okay, moving right along. And stop. See how Randy is chewing his food? This mirrors the way Norman Bates eats in Psycho. Here the group continues to chat about the likelihood of Casey's killer being a man or woman, and Tatum mentions Basic Instinct.
The killer could easily be female. Basic Instinct.
Yep, that movie, where Sharon Stone, a female, is revealed to be the murderer. And at this moment right here...
Did you really put her liver in the mailbox? Because I heard that they found her liver in the mailbox next to her spleen and her pancreas.
Randy is imitating comedian Jerry Lewis.
Like I tell you, then you won't get in any trouble. Shut up!
Fast forward. When Sidney says...
It's like deja vu all over again.
That's a reference to a quote famously attributed to baseball legend Yogi Berra, who was known for his yogiisms. Skipping ahead. When Ghostface calls Sidney, he says...
Are you alone in the house?
Which is very similar to the title of a made-for-TV movie, Are You in the House Alone? Moving along. Okay, let's stop here. When Dewey arrests Billy, we hear Billy's last name for the first time.
Who is that? Billy Loomis.
Which is the same last name as Dr. Sam Loomis from Halloween, who is Michael Myers' psychiatrist.
Loomis, Dr. Sam Loomis.
See? I warned you there were a lot of Halloween references in this movie. But this reference is twofold, because Samuel Loomis is also the name of the boyfriend in Psycho. Okay, let's stop here. See Tatum's VW Beetle? It's the same car from Stephen King's The Shining that crashed along the side of the road.
So how does it feel to be
And here, as Tatum confronts Gale outside of school,
People want to know. They have a right to know.
we can spot a cameo from the legendary horror actress Linda Blair, who starred in The Exorcist. Let's pause here. When Stu says,
Oh, you mean after you branded him the Candyman?
that is a reference to the villain in the 1992 flick Candyman. And stop. Here is Principal Himbry again, fixing his hair just like he did as Fonzie in Happy Days. And then right here, as the Principal Himbry meets a janitor in the hallway,
What you call me?
Wes Craven is making a cameo just like Hitchcock used to make cameos in all of his films. And he's dressed in the original costume worn by Nightmare on Elm Street villain Freddy Krueger. Himbry even calls him Fred.
Not your friend.
So we'll add 3 to the board for this one. See this here hanging in the closet? That's just like the Fonz's iconic leather jacket. Let's add 1 more to the board for the Fonz. As Principal Himbry takes his last breath, the reflection of Ghostface in his eye mimics the key moments in Hitchcock's Psycho and Strangers on a Train. Okay, fast forward. When Tatum says,
You're starting to sound like some Wes Carpenter flick or something.
she's mashing up the names Wes Craven and John Carpenter, the Halloween director, so we're going to add 2 on the board for this one. Moving along, when Randy suggests the cops should watch to solve the case, that's a horror film starring Jamie Lee Curtis.
Everybody's a suspect!
And look, there's a poster for another film she's in. Let's add 2 to the board for Jamie Lee. Here, when Sydney calls her town,
The town that dreaded sundown.
that's also the title of another lesser-known 1976 horror film that was also based on a true story. And pause. Right here, Sydney brings up Jamie Lee Curtis again, saying,
How come Jamie Lee Curtis is in all of his movies?
She's the Scream.
so we'll throw 1 more on the board here for the Scream Queen herself. Okay, hear the song playing as Tatum heads to the garage? It's Drop Dead Gorgeous by Republica, perhaps foreshadowing what's to come. And when she says,
What movie is this from? I spit on your garage.
it's a play off the title of the 1978 horror film I Spit on Your Grave. This comment here
Cut, Casper.
is a reference to this friendly guy. And then Ghostface slices into Tatum's arm, just like Michael Myers does to Jamie Lee Curtis in this scene. In fact, in the audio commentary, Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson said this entire scene in the garage is similar to this gruesome scene in Halloween, where the character Annie is also killed in the garage. Craven has also referred to this entire sequence as Hitchcockian, based on the way it was shot and edited, so we'll count that too. Fast forward a bit, and here Randy says,
What's Leatherface doing here?
which you may remember from earlier because that's another reference to the killer from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And when Stu says,
As if.
and Randy replies,
Oh, really, Alicia?
it's a nod to Alicia Silverstone's character Cher from the 1995 classic Clueless.
As if.
That's way existential.
Really, Alicia?
Pause here. As Billy and Sydney discuss her PTSD, he says,
It's like Jodie Foster in Silence of the Lambs when she keeps having flashbacks of her dead father.
that's because in that movie, Jodie Foster's character also experienced the murder of a parent, just like Sydney in Scream. Okay, fast forward a bit. Oh hey, look at that. They're watching Halloween. How meta. Alright, we're almost at the end here, so stay low and let's stick together.
He was gutted and hung from the goalpost on the football field.
What are we waiting for?
As the teens head off after learning of the death of Principal Himbry, they chant a song called Ride of the Valkyrie, which is a classical music staple used in many films. So, let's count that. Another one of them yells, which is how the Lone Ranger would address his horse, Silver.
Silver!
And yes, that is also a silver car, but we will only count this as one. Here, Sydney's fall out of the window looks hauntingly similar to this moment from Friday the 13th, Part 3. Okay, let's stop here.
Behind you.
Ghostface sneaking up behind Randy
Behind you.
is just like the moment in Halloween where Michael stalks Laurie.
Behind you.
Does the blood dripping at Gale's feet look familiar? That's because it's based on this scene from Night of the Living Dead. And Sidney standing in the middle of the road drenched in blood? That's a throwback to Carrie. Well, let's stop here, because Billy's tumble down the stairs brings us to our last reference from this moment in, you guessed it, Halloween. When Billy says,
"We all go a little mad sometimes."
That's a direct quote from Psycho.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
Anthony Perkins, Psycho.
Yeah, that's what I just said. As Billy and Stu stand with their heads together and reveal themselves to be the killers, it matches this moment from the movie The Thing with Two Heads. When Billy says,
"That woman was a bag, flashed her all over town like she was Sharon Stone or something,"
about Sidney's mom having an affair, that's another reference to Sharon Stone from Basic Instinct. We'll throw one more on the board for Sharon.
Your mother.
Stop here. As they continue to taunt Sidney in the kitchen, Stu says,
What do we have behind door number 3, Sidney?
That's a reference to the 1960s game show, Let's Make a Deal.
And let's see what's behind that door. There it is.
Whoa, hold.
And then this quote?
Houston, we have a problem here.
That's from 1995's Apollo 13.
Houston, we have a problem.
And we know what you're thinking. But yes, we'll attribute this quote to the movie because the quote by the real-life Apollo astronauts was slightly different.
Houston, we've had a problem.
Seriously, Google it. And when Sidney escapes and calls Billy on the phone, she says,
Are you alone in the house?
This is a callback to an earlier reference to the made-for-TV horror movie, Are You in the House Alone?
Are you alone in the house?
So we'll count that one again. Lillard is really up on his movie knowledge because he also improvised this line.
I always had a thing for you, Sid.
Which is also uttered in 1973's Serpico.
I always had a thing for you, Sid.
And finally, this moment when Billy says,
Say hello to your mother.
That's a quote from the 1955 film East of Eden.
Say hello to your mother, Eric.
Bringing to an end the harrowing mystery.
Phew! We made it through every reference in Scream, we think. And probably because we didn't split up. Did we miss anything? Well, we're sure you'll tell us about it in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and happy Halloween!